Hi, Sahana. Can you hear me? I can't hear you.
Okay, you can see me?
Perfect. How is the sound from my side?
The sound is good.
Okay, good.
What about mine?
It's good.
Okay.
It's good.
I actually have a more powerful microphone, but I thought maybe it's not needed. This is good enough.
I think we're okay. It just we'll check with others shortly and see.
Okay.
Hello,
Hi,
Hello.
how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. I'm going to try to keep my microphone out of the video.
You should put your name, Curtis.
I will after we start. I just want people to know where they're at first. So we are live on YouTube as well, just so everyone knows that that we're broadcasting. So if anyone messages with any issues, do let me know.
When will Samyak join?
He should be joining any moment now. I was in a communication with him yesterday.
And Chinmay is on. Is she a speaker? Oh, okay. We're just seeing attendees now.
Yeah.
Chinmay is a friend.
Wonderful.
Namaste, Chinmay.
Namaste, Sahana ji.
Namaste.
So just logistics, is everyone going to be able to speak or?
Everyone will be on mute, and then if they have a question, they can ask the question and we can either unmute or they can pose the question in the chat.
Perfect.
Curtis, will you be showing on the screen the portions that I'm going to be reading, or should I pull up my own document?
I wasn't planning. I think it's better for you to read and others
Okay.
listen as opposed to having it on there as well. It's a little distracting to have the text when someone's reading.
And same question for the diagram.
I can share the diagram if you like.
I think you will, unless you make me the host, yeah, because you'll have to.
Yeah, I mean, you will be co-host as well. So I mean, certainly if you, it's up to you, but I can certainly share
Sure,
it.
I can do that. If you make me host, then let's try that right now,
Yeah,
so
let's
that
do that.
we're not.
Okay. That's strange.
Yeah, I'm not sure if multiple people can be host.
No, but you can have a co-host, but for some reason,
Co-host.
I think it's because we're broadcasting live on YouTube. I can only switch it to host. It's not allowing co-host, which is strange. Any case, I will get the diagram.
Okay, then why don't, because it's only one thing, so you don't need to make me co-host just for that.
Right. If you wouldn't mind, just when you're ready for me to share that, just let me know so I have a cue.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
So when I'm reading out, the people cannot see the text, right? They'll just hear me reading it.
Right.
I need to silence my phone.
Yes, good reminder. We're color coordinated today.
Who?
You and I.
Telepathy.
Great minds think alike.
Well, I do have Samyak's number, so maybe I can just.
Yeah, I was going to just suggest that if you wouldn't mind sending a message, that would be helpful.
Do you want to text the YouTube link, Curtis?
One moment. To where do you mean text the link?
I mean, I think you said it's live somewhere, right?
It is, but if someone's joining us directly on Zoom, they don't need the YouTube link. So it should have, anyone joining from social media, from it being advertised there, will just join in through that, and I can see anyone. No one has joined via YouTube yet, but I've made an announcement there.
Okay, sure. Yeah, I haven't shared that link anywhere. I think you shared it, but I didn't find it. So.
You didn't find it?
The one you had, that's fine. Just the live streaming link. It's okay.
Okay. I just go to YouTube, look for Global Collective.
Yeah. I mean, I emailed you the link.
I'm sharing the link with you, Pushpita.
Sure.
Yeah,
I haven't
so that's,
shared that link anywhere.
if you click on it, it just takes you right there.
Okay, no worries, no worries.
You didn't find it?
The one you had, that's fine. Just the live.
Yeah, I sent it to you, Pushpita, on
Okay.
WhatsApp.
We'll just wait a few more minutes for others to join. We'll begin shortly.
Huh?
Could everybody mute themselves?
Can everyone mute themselves or, I'm sorry, I didn't understand the question.
Oh, I was just saying, could everybody mute? I think there are a couple.
Oh, yes, no, I'm monitoring that. Everyone will be muted upon entry.
Did everybody mute themselves?
Can everyone mute themselves or, I'm sorry, I didn't understand the question.
Oh, I was just saying, could everybody mute?
Hello?
He's not getting what he wants.
Yeah.
Hello?
কি হয়েছে?
Ibo, are you able to get into that event?
Yeah.
Oh,
Welcome, everyone. We'll be beginning shortly, just waiting for a few more people
Yeah.
to show up.
Yeah. Do you have a laptop there? Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, I think we'll go ahead and begin. Pushpita and Sahana, are you okay with us to start?
Curtis, I got a message from Samyak that he is unable to join. Oh, I think he's joined. Okay.
Yes. Okay.
Okay, I'm okay with
Okay.
starting now.
All right. Very good. Just going to stop sharing my screen.
I'm unable to switch on my video. It says the host.
Yeah, sorry. Yes, that was my head. 1 second. Okay. Very good. Thank you. All these security measures to make sure we stay in a secure and tranquil environment here. Thank you everyone for joining. In celebration of Sahana Singh's new book, Revisiting the Educational Heritage of India, hosted by Global Collective Publishers and the Coalition of Hindus of North America. We are thankful to Sahana for documenting the great educational heritage of India. Her new book describes a unique ecosystem which ensured that Gurus and Acharyas handed the lamp of learning to generations of students. And as Sahana puts it, when swords quenched their thirst and famine ravaged the lands, Indians still held on to their truth that there was nothing more purifying than knowledge. Sahana Singh is an author and commentator based in Texas in the United States. She's an environmental engineer by qualification who writes on a variety of issues, including Indian history, water management, and education. An alumna of Delhi Technological University, Sahana made a career shift to writing after moving to Singapore. She worked as an editor of Asian Water magazine for many years. Sahana has won several awards for journalism, including the Developing Asia Journalism Award in 2008. A short animation video made by her on the world's water crisis won the top prize at the TU Delft Urban Water Movie Contest awarded by the Delft University of Technology in the Netherlands in 2012. Her articles have been published in Reader's Digest, Washington Post, Discovery Channel Asia, Asian Water Magazine, Swarajya India Facts, and other publications. She has moderated panel discussions on water management at several international conferences. Sahana is on the board of many nonprofit organizations related to history, heritage, education, restoration of samskara, and to the cause of helping Hindu refugees. She is passionate about traveling and connecting the dots across different societies, civilizations, and disciplines. Today's discussion will be moderated by Pushpita Prasad. Pushpita is a storyteller and communications professor with a background in working with media, technology, content, and history with a passion for Indic causes. She researches, publishes articles, and educates about topics related to India, Hinduism, its festivals and traditions, decolonization, media representation, and human rights. Pushpita earned a master's in mass communications from the University of Denver, Colorado, a diploma in journalism from the Indian Institute of Mass Communication, and a bachelor's of commerce from SRCC in Delhi University. She's on the board of the Coalition of Hindus of North America, CONA, and believes in the power of grassroots advocacy, activism, and dialogue to drive change and understanding. We are also happy to welcome additional commentary by Samyak Pandey, a fourth-year medical student at King's College London, who serves as the National PR Coordinator of the National Hindu Students Forum UK, the largest Hindu student movement outside of Bharat. Previously the president of its King's chapter, he was involved in the establishment of the UK's first Dharmic prayer space. And before we hand over to Pushpita and Sahana, if anyone has any questions, whether on YouTube or here on Zoom, we'll be keeping everyone muted. But if you would like to pose a question, please put it in the chat, and we'll save time to pose those questions later in the program. And I'll also be posting a link in Zoom where, if you would like to purchase the book, you can purchase it from the Global Collective website with a discount code to receive 20% off, or obviously you can go to any of your favorite retailers and order it online there. And if you wish to reach out to us later on, I will leave a web link where you can contact Global Collective Publishers as well. And with that, I would happy and delighted to welcome both Sahana Singh and Pushpita Prasad. And thank you, Pushpita, for moderating today's talk. And we're very excited to hear more and to learn more about this very, very rich topic. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Curtis, for that wonderful and warm introduction. So did we want to do the book, hold up the books and do the launch?
Yes, absolutely. So
this
is all new
right
in a digital world that we are in, but we are so pleased and so proud. So thank you. This is, a very proud moment for here at Global Collectives in the United States as we endeavor to bring more Indian publishing to the United States. And so we're delighted. And if we could only be in person to hold this book up together, that would be a great honor. But in the digital world, this is, we're so proud to be holding this up. So congratulations, Sahana, and we're delighted to hear more from you today.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
We can all imagine the virtual applause that's everyone's doing in their own
Yes.
in their own rooms. So the imagination is a good thing, but nothing like having an actual book in your hands, even in this age of digital. So I know I always enjoy, even though Kindles and everything is great, it's really nice to have a real book to hold, and it's very tangible and makes, at least for me, it makes it much more tangible and real. So with that wonderful, thank you for that wonderful introduction.
Yes, and I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm just going to let everyone know I'm going to start the recording because we do want to make this available for those who were not able to attend. So you'll just see a prompt come up on your screen shortly. So bear with me 1 second.
Sure.
Curtis, can you make the speaker, make it the speaker view so that we can see the speaker occupying the full screen?
I think that is something you'll need to do on your own Zoom. I don't think I can control others' view of that.
But then it's happening.
Is it being recorded? The speaker view is being recorded.
Oh, yes, yes.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
So we'll just do this again for the recording. So let's all hold up our books
and
do the official launch. So thank you very much for that warm introduction, and congratulations, Sahana.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Congratulations.
So I think without further ado, I think we'd like to start the book launch with asking Sahana, our wonderful author, to read a little bit from her book to get us all in the right frame and context as we start the discussion. So over to you.
Thank you. Namaste to everyone. And I just want to remember the gurus who have guided me before I start. Om Guru Bhyo Namaha. So I'll just read from the screen itself. Today, we take for granted that education starts with general schooling, leads to specialization in university, and is followed by further specialization for those who desire it. But how did such a system of education get institutionalized? What were the earliest subjects taught in ancient universities? The answers lie in the evolution of Indian civilization, in innumerable works produced on every conceivable subject that produced an unrivaled ecosystem of learning. There emerged a long line of educators from India who began with the idea that holistic learning could only be obtained in the midst of nature, in a state of deep reflection, under the close supervision of a parent-like guru. India's earliest teachers were the gurus who taught in gurukulas and ashramas located far away from the hustle and bustle of towns. It is no surprise that the Vedas, which are the earliest known oral books containing the thoughts of a highly civilized society, are replete with exquisite references to nature and the concept of interdependence of living organisms. To these gurus, it was important for humans to realize their humble status in the infinite universe before embarking on the long journey of learning. There is a poignant story in the Chandogya Upanishad which illustrates how a guru would let a student arrive at fundamental truths by simply observing nature. So here is the excerpt within quotes. The boy was oftentimes left alone to his own thoughts and had frequent opportunities of holding communion with nature, from whom he sometimes learned great truths. While tending his teacher's cattle, or gathering fuel in the forest, he felt the influence of deep solitude, which not infrequently matured his ideas and ripened his judgment. It is said of Satyakama Jabala that he learned truths from the bull of the herd that he was tending, from the fire he had lighted, and from the flamingo and a diver bird which flew near him. One day in the evening, when he had penned his cows and lain wood in the evening fire, his teacher met him and said, "Friend, you shine like one who knows Brahman, supreme consciousness. Who has taught you?" "Not men," was the young man's reply. "I have learned from nature that the four quarters and the earth, the sky, the heaven and the ocean, the sun, the moon, the lightning and the fire and the organs and minds of living beings, yes, the whole universe was Brahman." End quote. Not all Gurukulas were in forests though. Many were in villages and towns, since the Gurus were usually householders with families. However, secluded locations were preferred. Over time, the systems of transmission of learning to newer generations got institutionalized and gave birth to famous universities such as Takshashila, Nalanda, and the temple universities, of which the remains are still found in southern India. A sizable number of foreign students came to study in India from China, Korea, Japan, Indonesia, and West Asia. While the most famous names are Fahia and Xuanzang, who left behind detailed accounts, there were thousands of others who made difficult journeys by foot, on pack animals, and on ships just to imbibe knowledge from Indian professors. India was perceived as a mystical land inhabited by civilized and sophisticated people. Many of the foreign students copied texts and commentaries to take back to their countries. The rush for gaining an education from the scholars of India could well be considered similar to today's rush to study in or be certified by American and European universities. Yijing mentioned 56 students from China, Japan, and Korea who studied in Nalanda in the interim period of 40 years between Xuanzang's visit and his own. It is interesting that many scholars from China first visited Indonesia, where they spent some years learning Sanskrit and other subjects in order to gain enough competency to seek admission in famous Indian universities. Indonesia was like a mini India. Yijing has noted the presence of more than 1,000 scholars in one city in Indonesia, where they studied all the subjects that were taught in India. It must be noted that there was no hard distinction between Hinduism and Buddhism in ancient India. Given the tradition of pluralism in India, Buddha's teachings were regarded as knowledge being shared by yet another guru with ever-growing numbers of followers. Buddha was a Kshatriya by upbringing, having been born and raised in a royal family. He renounced his family in the manner of a sannyasi, which was also an existing tradition in the land. Historian Conrad Elst points out that the ideas Buddha developed were already present in the Vedic tradition. Concepts such as karma, reincarnation, yoga, and jnana have been a part of Vedic tradition from times immemorial. Buddha never claimed that he was inventing anything new. Rather, he said he was walking on the path laid by earlier seers. Many Vaishnava sects believed that Buddha was an avatara of Vishnu himself. Accordingly, many educational institutes of the time offered Buddha's teachings as one of the disciplines alongside the philosophies expounded by other famous gurus. Also, the monks who transmitted the teachings of Buddha to China, Japan, and other countries in East and Southeast Asia were often called Brahmana or Baramon, and even their gotra was noted. In China, the word Brahmana itself had become a synonym for knowledge, and scientific books from India were called Brahmana books. There is a curious hesitation among modern historians to refer to India's multidisciplinary centers of traditional learning as universities. This comes from the excessive importance given to the written word, to solid buildings with established pedagogy, and rigid systems of certification. Thus, the talented but bare-chested and dhoti-clad engineers and architects of ancient India who built incredible irrigation canals, rainwater harvesting structures, palaces, forts, roads, dams, and aqueducts are barely acknowledged as professionals. Similarly, medical practitioners of yore who developed an elaborate system of diagnosing disease and combined indigenous pharmacopoeia with spiritual advice towards proper lifestyle and wellness are yet to get their due. They developed treatises on general medicine and surgery that still stand validated. They too are worthy but forgotten progenitors of today's science. An erroneous and divisive argument often made is that modern universities such as Nalanda were introduced by Buddhists. F.W. Thomas wrote in a letter on 22nd October 1944, real universities with colleges and endowments were created by Buddhism. This comes from the end of quote. This comes from the flawed thinking that Buddhism was disconnected from the ecosystem of learning that existed for millennia. And secondly, a university must necessarily have large buildings, lecture halls, standard systems of pedagogy, certification, and convocations. In fact, modern universities are built on the intellectual foundations laid by earlier conglomerations of gurukulas in forests. So I end the excerpt here.
Wow, that's I think that's from the opening passage of your book, and I think it just frames everything so beautifully. And in fact, as I heard you, your words seem to transport folks back into like this idyllic world where you're struck, and I'm especially struck by the holistic nature of everything that you describe. There's like a blurring of some of these modern lines we see between the school and the environment in which it is situated. And I know that's quite trendy nowadays, especially in early elementary education with Waldenberg models and stuff like that, to have early education set in like, the environment or a forest or something like some garden or something like that. But then also the blurring of the lines between the sacred and the secular, and the deep cross connections between all the different strains of dharmic thoughts, Buddhism, Hinduism, Jainism. Some of these terms are just very different from what we understand them to be today. So I think your words are powerful. They also echo, I think they're powerful because they also echo so much of what we have heard described when we read our epics, when we read Amrititra Kathas, when we hear the tales from our, elders. What you say resonates. So as you embarked on your journey of research, Anna, as you found the details and the history and the testimonies that you shared in your book, were there any surprises, something that was different from, echoing what we had heard along the way or in our shared collective?
Yes, a number of times I was surprised because, there are a lot of things that we imagine that they are modern, that they must have started maybe 100 years ago. So when I was researching and I came to know that these things are actually existing in India for centuries, for millennia, those things were surprising. So for example, I learned that teachers and students had so much mobility that they could travel to the institution of their choice. So that was very surprising. This is, of course, I'm talking about my first book, and it's also there in my second book. So the teachers and students in those days when it was so hard to travel, you can't just get into a plane and reach the university of your choice. But they were traveling, they were taking the long road, they were walking, they were riding on pack animals and reaching the institution that they wanted to study, appearing for the admission test, whether it was Nalanda, Vikramshila. And that was astonishing. So they were doing all that in those times. So it's not like this today that, we hear of students in India traveling to IIT, they have an orientation, they travel to that institute, but they were doing it then. So you hear of this university in the extreme south of India, Kantalur Shala, and students are coming from the north of India to study there. From the Ganga plains, they were coming to study there because that was very good. It had more subjects. It was very holistic. They even had martial arts along with the regular subjects in Kantalur Shala in Kerala, and they were coming from the north to study there. And similarly, in Nalanda, you hear of professors who are from Kanchipuram teaching in Nalanda, or you hear of professors who earlier set up Vallabhi University, and now they are teaching in Nalanda University. So things like that, that was a big surprise. And the other thing maybe I can think of is that in the new book, I have written about a carving that was found in Karnataka of a woman scholar. And this is the most direct evidence you can get that women were getting high education. So there is a carving which was found in Karnataka in Kolar, and now it is kept in a museum, which I just learned about in some blog, and then I confirmed that it actually exists. I still haven't gone and seen it. But that carving, I have good pictures of it. And it shows a woman who is in ascetic clothing, and she has a manuscript in her hand. And she is described, and the inscription says that she is a knower of Shastras, a very respected lady. Now, she doesn't seem to be from a royal family. It doesn't say that she's a princess or anything like that. Just her parents' names are given. So she's just an ordinary person who has reached that level of knowledge, and the villagers have made this carving of her. So that was another big surprise. So like that, there are many others. If I can remember one more, it's there is a temple in Cambodia, or rather the ruins of a temple that I have visited, the Ta Prohm temple, I think. And I didn't know that it was actually a university. So it was when I was researching for this book that, this place that I visited, and it's the face of so many tourist guides, that all the trees running over that place, and you can see images. I didn't know it was a university which had hundreds of students and professors, and it was modeled after Nalanda. So I have mentioned this in my new book. So lots of surprises along the way. So it's a journey of learning for me as well.
I know, I was surprised to hear the volume of universities. I think we all know of Takshashila, Nalanda, but I think you sketched this whole sort of ecosystem of universities all over the place, not just beyond Takshashila and Nalanda. And I think the interchange that you described between them. So just to follow on then, that landscape that you sketched of these gurukuls and these universities sort of an interconnected system, holistically connected. Why has that become so foreign to us today, right? I mean, I know you were surprised, and you've dedicated a good amount of time to researching this, but I think the layperson is generally quite surprised to hear this landscape described. So why are we so disconnected from our own heritage that many of us are like, oh, wow, didn't realize that?
That's a very deep question, needs a lot of pondering. But of course, I have described how that ecosystem of learning was destroyed. So that's the second part of my book, where I talk about how we were run over by invaders who came and destroyed the universities, physical destruction. I mean, imagine today, if something like that happened in Harvard University or Oxford University, a band of invaders coming and killing all the professors and students. I mean, you would wonder how knowledge would even survive. So that is what has happened. Our libraries were destroyed, our universities were destroyed, and later, that led to a number of scholars fleeing from there. And I've described all that in my book in more detail than the earlier book. So the second book has all the details of the destruction, and then the colonization which followed. After the physical destruction by the Islamic invaders, we had a period when we were colonized one after the other by various European colonizers, and that changed the whole character of education. Because we got deracinated, we were distanced from our own samskaras. We had a kind of discipline, the samskaras, that 16 samskaras that we followed, which was closely connected to education. So we just got disconnected from that. Then we lost our languages because our medium of education became English. And once you study something in a foreign language, then a lot of things don't make sense. So slowly that whole thing vanished, that whole structure which existed. And it has actually been documented by many of the English people themselves. So if you read my book, I have mentioned G.W. Leitner and other people who are actually bemoaning that the education is a system that had been established by the Indians is getting lost. And wherever we are imposing higher taxes, where we are impoverishing them, there the village school is disappearing. So that has all been documented in my book as well. I've compiled all that data where it has been described. So this is the thing, we lost our languages, we lost our connection with our culture, and we don't have our own eyes to view ourselves. So it's like we got alien lenses to look at our own culture, our own civilization. We can't even make sense of the old books, the Shastras that are there if you want to read. There are still millions and millions of manuscripts there in India and abroad that have not been translated. And we probably don't have that many even scholars who can translate them. So we have to build up that again, all over again. So I think that's what has made it all so foreign to us.
Yeah, I think I read in your book, right, that there were, when the British were taking over, so we are looking at pretty recent history, there were 100,000 village schools just in the province of Bihar and Bengal alone. I mean, that's just one province. So if you multiply that across so I think that just speaks to the infrastructure that has been demolished. So I think maybe you can go back and like read us a little bit more about your book. I think we wanted to learn a little bit about the role of how the nuances of learning worked, and maybe we can do a little bit more of a reading.
Okay, let me just scroll down to that page about reading the nuances of learning. Sorry, I should have opened it up before. Give me a minute.
But I know you already touched on that's definitely a question I want to ask is, you have a whole chapter on women. And I think, that was something that resonated with me a lot. And I think you have so many names, and that was new to me. We learn about Upadhyayani, the Ganikas, the female authors of the Rig Veda, a Brahmacharini versus a Brahmavadini, new terms for me. And so I think it just, when you have so many words, it shows the importance of a context. So I think your research seems to, again, contradict the modern day narratives that say that Hinduism did not really assign a high value for learning as far as women were concerned. So as you look for your chapter, what is your take on how education was viewed for women, or how widely did women participate in it?
Yeah, so women were totally a part of education. So because the words for education, for Vidya is a feminine term, the goddess, and Saraswati that we worship before we even read a book, we do any kind of study. So it was, nowhere was there this concept that education is not for women. It was for boys and girls. Even the ceremonies were for both boys and girls. So education was definitely for both, for men and women. But yes, there was a kind of deterioration later on, right? When we were invaded, that was the time when everything changed. I mean, even our dresses, like we were wearing clothes, men and women were wearing similar clothes. Like there was no fixation that you have to cover your breasts, right? If you see the old carvings, right? The women were very free in their dressing, and also they were teachers. So we hear of gurus who are teaching in ashrams, women gurus. Then we have plays, right? We have Sanskrit plays where it's written in the, I think it's in the 8th or 10th century, which talks about a woman traveling to the university along with another friend of hers to go and study, right? And she's saying that she's changing her university because the professor is not giving her enough attention. He's busy writing his own book, so she doesn't want to study with him. She wants to go to a university in the south. So we have such situations in plays, Sanskrit plays written long ago that also illustrate. I mean, there will be some naysayers who will say that maybe it was fiction and it wasn't there in real life, but I don't think so. There's enough evidence that women were being educated. And as you said, there were so many terms, esoteric subjects, difficult subjects that were being studied. And the women students, there's a specific name to indicate that it's a female who's studying the subject. And those words are in the Sanskrit dictionary. Why would they be in the dictionary if they're not studying? If such women don't exist. So yeah, the women were totally there. But yes, we have to add this caveat that maybe not every woman was going and seeking higher education, because there is a biological role as well. Women who marry, produce children, they get busy with housework, taking care of the child. So maybe the primary role for most women was definitely to take care of the household, right? In those days also technology was not so advanced that you can multitask and do hundreds of things. But yes, there were joint families, and it does look like those women who are hell-bent on studying further, and they probably don't want to get married, they want to study, they were doing it. Because why else would we have the names of such people being, even the Rig Veda, we have names of females who have, rishis. Later on also, so many works written by women. And then, for example, Leelavati, a book on mathematics, is the whole book on mathematics is addressed to a woman. Now, we don't know whether that woman was a lover of the author, Bhaskaracharya, or how was she related to him. But all along, he's writing those problems, those mathematical problems, and saying, "Oh, lovely lass, can you solve this? What do you think is the answer? Oh, fair one, oh, beautiful one." So all the problems are addressed to that woman. So it's very obvious. And then, of course, I mentioned the sculpture to you that was found in Karnataka, right? Which shows that women were being educated. But yes, there were women who were probably finding the burden of household work a lot, and maybe they just didn't have the time to pursue their interests, but there were others who were doing it. So that's the picture I got.
Leelavati is interesting, interesting rom-com talk. Anyways, so let's have you go to your second reading.
Yes. So this is the Nuances of Learning chapter. It's the Guru or Acharya occupied the prime position in the knowledge-based society of India. The concept of Guru Runa was intrinsic to the worldview. When we learn from a Guru, we incur a debt or Runa, which cannot be paid back directly to the master, but imposes on us a sacred duty to become good disciples who follow and distill the teachings received. Secondly, it becomes incumbent on us to teach what we learn to the best of our abilities to the next generation of students. Dying without passing on one's knowledge is to die with debt. In a similar manner, the debt we owe to our parents, Pitru Runa, gets discharged when we raise our own children or foster children and transmit forward the love and values we received. In fact, one of the strands in the Yagnopavita, the sacred thread worn by a Snataka, a new graduate, symbolizes the debt owed to the Acharya. The rigorous life of a student in his Guru's ashrama prepared him to develop enormous stamina, patience, dedication to service, concentration, and ability to tolerate physical hardships. It laid the basis for a sound character. Even princes slept on the floor during the brahmachari days. Thus, a student was required to be up at the crack of dawn before his guru awoke and to go to bed only after his guru retired for the night. Eating heavy meals or sleeping in the afternoon was not allowed. In fact, students were required to be light sleepers in general. Maintaining decorum in front of the guru was important. Talking loudly or yawning in the presence of a guru was regarded as inappropriate behavior. And yet, despite all the rules, it was not like a prison for a student because the guru ensured there were opportunities for fun, enjoyment, and challenges. The Guru-Shishya relationship was an incredibly special one and has been enshrined in hundreds of stories in Indian literature. Following is a passage from the famous autobiography of a yogi. So I quote from the book, "Quiet evening hours often brought one of my Guru's discourses, treasures against time. His every utterance was chiseled by wisdom. A sublime self-assurance marked his mode of expression. It was unique. He spoke as none other in my experience ever spoke. His thoughts were weighed in a delicate balance of discrimination before he permitted them the outward garb of speech. The essence of truth, all pervasive, even with a psychological, physiological aspect, came from him like a fragrant exudation of the soul. I was conscious always that I was in the presence of a living manifestation of God. The weight of his divinity automatically bowed my head before him." India's classical music lineages exemplify the Guru-Shishya Parampara, unbroken tradition. Living in devotion with the Guru who lives, eats, breathes, and sleeps music, the Shishya imbibes the atmosphere of the art, inadvertently internalizing both musical knowledge and a broader foundation of contextual information. It was as if there was no separation between a teacher and a curriculum to be taught, and one learned music by emulating one's guru, by becoming absorbed in him or her. A young Carnatic musician, Naresh, who was interviewed by a researcher, informed that his guru never told him he would teach anything. Naresh said, "You live with the music, and after a point, you literally live the music." An important mantra which has come down the ages is usually chanted at the beginning of a class by both teacher and student and exemplifies the bond of togetherness. A lot of us know this. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karvavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. So the meaning is, Om, may he protect us both. May he help us both to enjoy the fruits of the scriptural study. May we both exert together to find the true meaning of the sacred texts. May our studies make us brilliant. May we never quarrel with each other. Om Shanti Shanti. So this, and the other thing is, despite the predominance of the Guru, there was also an understanding that knowledge acquired from a teacher was only a fraction of what one could possibly learn. A famous Sanskrit shloka, which finds a mention in paraphrased form in Mahabharata, in Haradatta's commentary on Apastamba Dharma Shastra, and echoed in many other places, goes like this. I'm not reading the Sanskrit part. From the teacher is learned a quarter from the student's own intelligence, a quarter from fellow students, and a quarter with the passage of time. Thus, it is clear that discussions, debates, and conversations with peers were considered as important as instruction by the Guru, along with self-study and reflection, while the component of experience and insights gained with the passage of time was also factored in. A noteworthy aspect of higher education in Sanskrit was its aim to preserve rituals and to ensure that the orally transmitted texts were kept free from phonetical, grammatical, and semantic erosion. This is the reason that grammar developed a precision that one would associate with science. I come to the end of the excerpt.
Beautiful. I think the words on the Guru are so powerful. And the Guru Shishya Parampara is very iconic, I guess, in Hindu culture and Indian history. And I think when you described the learning of music, that is exactly, I think in the modern day, that's probably one of the most, I guess, strong, tangible traditions that you can still find, because every time you hear a classical musician, you hear about the gharana and the gurus that he or she has trained under. I think Guru is also, like Sanskrit has contributed so many words to the modern language, but Guru is probably, I would say, the most popular. No scientific poll here, but I'm just kind of guessing it. So there's how would we differentiate a Guru in the classical Hindu tradition versus the popular understanding of a Guru today?
So I think the Guru word has been overused and people don't seem to get the special meaning of the Guru. So not every teacher is a Guru. The Guru is special. So we have many words in Sanskrit for a regular teacher who makes you a subject matter expert. So we have Acharya, we have Upadhyaya, we have Shikshaka, but the role of the Guru is different. So the Guru is an embodiment of higher knowledge who helps the students to connect to their own wisdom. So, you know, in our Shastras, they say that nothing is new. Whatever you everything is in you. The knowledge is also within you. You just have to connect to it. And that's what the Guru does. So, you know, with these words like management Guru or lifestyle Guru, they don't mean what the Sanskrit texts say about a Guru. So the Guru is an embodiment of higher knowledge who will light a lamp in the mind of the student to illuminate the path of the student. That is the main role of the Guru. So, of course, if you have a subject matter expert who makes you good in that subject, but also lights the lamp within you, then you can call that person a Guru. So that needs to be highlighted. And I have done that in my book, that the Guru awakens the sleeping mind. Guru does not treat your mind like a container that has to be crammed with facts, which is what a lot of teachers do. What the Guru does is to light a lamp, right? That is the most important thing. And in my book, I have actually listed the qualities that a Guru is required to have. And this is there from one of the Shastras. And you will find that the qualities are like self-awareness, detachment, virtuousness, austerity, humility, firmness in enforcing discipline, absence of desire for wealth or ownership, or then a lack of how do you say? I mean, freedom from lust, and then all these qualities. Treating the student like his own child. So a guru has to be like a parent. You can't just be teaching the subject in isolation. A guru would know what's going on in the student's life, what are the problems he's undergoing, and also counsel. So it's like he's also a psychological counselor. These are so many of the roles of roles of a guru. So that's why I think, as a Hindu, I cringe when I hear the word guru being applied loosely.
Yeah, too much, unfortunately. I think that's a tall list of qualities. So you can see that every teacher could not be, every acharya could not be a guru. That's a very tall order of qualities that was required. So I think as we are continuing on this journey, Curtis, do you want to share that knowledge map that we wanted to discuss? Because I think one of the most, at least for me, one of the most unique things about your book was this knowledge map that you show on, I think, page 148. So those of anybody who has the book can sort of follow along. Because I think, again, what your book does such a beautiful job is bringing together these disparate threads that I think are familiar to, I mean, at least some threads are familiar to some people. But I think this snapshot in particular is such a beautiful summary of everything brought together in like one snapshot. We are in the era of sound bites and, quick fixes. And I thought this was like a great summary of everything, the journey starting as further back as 100 BCE, with a lot of the interactions that we see between India and China. I think those of us who grew up studying in India read often about Chinese explorers and their reports on different aspects of Indian society, Fahian and several others that even I remember. And so there was a kind of a validation of that, but then these connected threads of how there was this whole kind of interconnected map where Japan, for example, I did not know Japan was so intricately interconnected. Though when you think about it in the light of what you know nowadays, yes, that makes sense. Southeast Asia, the fun fact of Chinese scholars going to Indonesia to train before coming to India sort of reminded me of this OTT series I've been watching recently called Kota, which is basically about kids going to Kota to study to get into the IITs. But then the connections on the other side of the world, which I think, again, they are there scattered through our history books. But if you look at it, there's such an interchange and such a back and forth that's going on. Like the threads we just see between China, Southeast Asia, Japan, coming to India. And as your book points out, that I think today, because of this interchange of knowledge, there are more ancient Sanskrit manuscripts in Japan than they are in India. I think I have that fact right. And that's probably because the weather there is more conducive to preserving them, but still quite a fascinating thing if you think about how old and consistent these interchanges have been. And then on the other side of the world, I think, again, if one looks at Greek and Roman literature and plays and popular culture, you do find references to the threads that bound these different civilizations. But to see it all put together, for me at least, was a powerful learning. And I think if there's one takeaway I think everybody should look at your book is that. And I think what struck me is soft power, much bandied about term these days. India is supposed to be advancing on the basis of soft power. But your book kind of validates that this is obviously a very ancient trend and an ancient tool. And the interconnectedness of the world in the ancients reflects the interconnectedness in some way of the world today. So like you said, what's old is new again. And it's a very fascinating graphic for me. So I think that might be like a perfect way for you to go into your next segment, which is the journeys that people were making for the sake of acquiring this knowledge.
Right. I have scrolled up in time. Yeah, thanks for highlighting that diagram. So, perilous journeys for the sake of Indian knowledge. That's a subheading.
Curtis, do you want to remove the screen?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, now we're back.
Okay. Fahia took 6 years to travel from China to central India in a journey full of physical dangers and hardship. He wrote in his memoirs, "When I look back on what I have gone through, my heart is involuntarily moved and the perspiration that flows forth ends like that. The perspiration that flows forth. That I encountered danger and trod the most perilous places without thinking of or sparing myself was because I had a definite aim and thought of nothing but to do my best in my simplicity and straightforwardness. Thus it was that I exposed my life where death seemed inevitable if I might achieve a 10,000th part of what I had hoped. So, end of quote. Fahyang's journey to learn from the masters inspired many other Chinese students such as Xuanzang to follow suit. India was called Intu by the Chinese, which means moon, because according to Xuanzang, it was the only country which eliminated the darkness into which the world had fallen after the passing of Buddha by providing a succession of learned sages. One of Xuanzang's biggest worries after he had spent some 17 years traveling within India, collecting manuscripts, books, notes, statues, and Buddhist icons was how to transport all of these to China. Luckily for him, King Harsha of Kannauj and King Kumara of Assam made elaborate arrangements for his transport. Still, several disasters accosted him on the way. While crossing the river Sindhu in a convoy of boats in the year 644 Common Era, a terrible storm led to 50 manuscripts falling into the water. So Xuanzang waited for 2 months at Hund, north of Attock, I think it's in Afghanistan, waiting for fresh copies of the manuscripts. He waited again at Kunduz in today's northern Afghanistan for 1 month to receive copies of what he had lost in the Sindhu. Finally, he waited for 8 months at Khotan. One can imagine how important it was for Xuanzang to carry back with him a complete set of primary sources from India to China, as he waited at 3 different locations to get replacement copies of those which he lost on the way. It is not surprising that Chinese philosopher and former ambassador to the US, Hu Shi, from 1891 to 1962, that was Hu Shi, that's his time duration when he lived. He said that India had conquered and dominated China culturally for 20 centuries without ever having to send a single soldier across her border. And he further went on to say, never before had China seen a religion so rich in imagery, so beautiful and captivating in ritualism, and so bold in cosmological and metaphysical speculations. Like a poor beggar suddenly halting before a magnificent storehouse of precious stones of dazzling brilliancy and splendor, China was overwhelmed, baffled, and overjoyed. She begged and borrowed freely from this munificent giver. China's indebtedness to India can never be fully told. End of excerpt.
Wonderful. I think that between the map and this, I think it's just a beautiful snapshot. So I think at this point, let's introduce Samyak. Samyak, I don't know if you're on camera, but we're very excited to have him join the event as well. And he joins us all the way from King's College in London, where Samyak serves as the National PR Coordinator of the National Hindu Students Forum, which is the largest Hindu body outside of Bharat. So Samyak, are you there? Can you?
Yes. Namaste Pushpalaji. Namaste Sahana.
Namaste. Wonderful. So I think Samyak reached out to Sahana ji, she was inspired by her book, and I think we thought it would be a wonderful opportunity for him to come and share some quick thoughts.
Namaste all. Thank you, Sahana ji, just for this opportunity. Honestly, it's amazing being with all of you elders today. I'm glad you actually just touched on the part about China, because that's how I was hoping to start off my thoughts. It was one of my favorite parts of the book, actually, how you mentioned how China was overwhelmed, baffled, and overjoyed. And then I wonder, is that the response that China has now towards Indian academia? The same way that, the rest of the world back then was overwhelmed and overjoyed by the contributions of Bharat. I think to myself as a student, 22-year-old right now, how much is the rest of the world impressed by the output of Bharat? Then how much is the Indian Republic putting forward into the investment of research, top quality? King's College London has a name. But is the quality of teaching really as great as some places you'll find in India? Probably not. But what gives it the name here that institutions in India don't have? That emphasis, I would say, on pushing forth good academia over career building. And that brings on to one of the points that you mentioned in the book, the overall holistic building that we are missing now in Indian education. And this is what all I've inferred from all of my speaking that I've had with my cousins and my family. You mentioned how, if today Ujjain would be our Greenwich, I'm sitting here right now, 20 minutes drive away from Greenwich. And that made me think, a lot of times we as Indians, we refer to things as this of the East, this of the East. Tulsidas Ji is the Shakespeare of the East. And I think that speaks volumes about the extent of our colonization and how far we need to go through the decolonial process. When are we going to start orienting everything with us first? And that comes with a sense of self-confidence. And that's where I think this book is vital, because it allows us to tap into our heritage properly. The very fact that books like this need to be written so that people are aware shows us that we are failing as a community to actually pass on this knowledge. How are we allowing systems to perpetuate that allow this to be hidden further and further? And I think on that point of decolonization there, us in the UK and our students movement here, we've gone to the extent where in our language, when we are speaking in English, we refer to terms solely in the Sanskrit version because we are aware of how bad some of the translations can be. We really avoid using the word God where possible. You'll often hear us as students in the UK saying the word Ishwara only. Ishwara, Brahman, where appropriate, soul is Atman, to the point where I can't remember the last time I said the word Hinduism. It is Hindu Dharma, Sanatana Dharma. You will find very few students in the UK who will be saying that word, because we are understanding that this is the process that we need to take on. I loved how, and I think this is very key to a lot of students who will be watching this later, a lot of people would take on the idea that in the same way how the Western systems within Abrahamic cultures have seen the separation of science and faith, that artificial demarcation, as you mentioned in the book, it doesn't exist with us. The very debates of religion and science that you have, people like Dawkins, sorry, what was it? Is it Dawkins, Richard Dawkins? Yeah, him and all the new atheists, as they call themselves, they all go on about. You think to yourself, this doesn't apply here, because we have the concepts of the Paravidya and the Aparavidya. There is the Aparavidya, which deals with the material self, and the Paravidya, which is beyond the self. Beyond the material existence. And there is never a collision within them, because that which is the Paravidya, that which is the truth of the universe, is beyond the access of the senses. So when that doesn't lie within the parameters, how can that be a dichotomy in any way to the great knowledge that we can acquire about the world? And that's how you mentioned, that faith and skepticism have coexisted. Logic and debate is something that we love as Hindus today. And I wonder how ready are young people who do have the intelligence, who do have the competence to understand the vast heritage of our people. When will they stop being ignorant of it? And that will stop when they begin that process of decolonization, when they begin to understand that the prerequisites that they're going with are coming from a Western lens. When they begin to see that the two are always intersected together for us, and there is no sort of argument between what is religion and what is science. And when that process begins to happen, I'm sure you will see a lot more young, confident people of dharmic backgrounds who will be ready to take this on and lead this institutional decolonization that needs to take place within Bharat. You mentioned, of course, the climate of oppression and the Indian Anglicists. That's something I'm sure everybody here can agree on. How often is it that we look to things in Bharat and we see the situation where if somebody isn't able to speak English, and particularly to the accent that I have being brought up here in the UK, somehow they are illiterate and with low self-confidence, as you mentioned, when that shouldn't be the case in the slightest. I loved how you touched that modern education is empowering and beneficial. You don't deny the benefits of the globalization process. And that is something that I think some apologists may go down the line of. What we see is that we can take what is good. I hope I've quoted the Rigvedic verse properly. Let us take the noble thoughts from all sides. Let us take those good processes. And that leads me on to the point where you mentioned about the women in education. Back when I was the president of my case, a Hindu society, I'd read Altekar actually, his book on the position of women in ancient Indian civilization. And I was overwhelmed and overjoyed to see the vast contributions, but also how he puts forward the idea that while we have degraded, that doesn't mean we should always look at things with a completely rose-tinted lens of our past. You mentioned it yourself. It wasn't as if every single woman, as we see today, was taking up these educational opportunities. But that doesn't mean that our society is somehow more uniquely regressive, as some people would like to say. In fact, it is exceptional in how many more women compared to other societies were taking part. And I think that is the point that we should be emphasizing as we then bring on the revolution that we should bring on today. How can we use these inspirational figures to inspire us and empower us today? The last point I just wanted to touch on was, you mentioned the Vergangenheitsbewältigung of the German people, the overcoming of the past that the German people have gone through in their literature process. So for those who aren't aware, I'm only aware of this because I'd studied German. A lot of German literature that was produced after the Second World War looked into how can we as a people begin to process what has happened. Now they have a very different angle from us. We are coming from the angle of the oppressed. They are coming from almost the angle of the oppressors collectively. They felt so. Because how could they have allowed the ills of the First World War and then the ills of Nazism to befall them? And therefore entire literature began to be produced on how do we overcome this? How do we make peace with what is our past? I think one of the best things about the book is your mentioning of how this, as you mentioned, the climate of oppression that went on and how it is time for us to confront it. It is time for us to actually look into why have our educational systems, our institutions decayed to this point? And now what? And what is next? Because a lot of people will sit here and sing the glories of our past, but they won't do anything further. It's all great to say that we had all of this beauty, but if you're not bringing that to the institutions of higher today, then you're not serving any purpose.
Right. And I think that ties in actually perfectly into one of the first questions we had gotten from the audience. So I just want to bring that up right now because there's an audience question that said, what is being done to revive the education of philosophy beyond a few localized efforts like, the Bal Vihars and the Chinmaya missions, etc.? Is there anything that's happening within the existing public education system? So I don't know if that's something you want to address, Sahana ji, or, I mean, I think in a more generic way, right? Your book is a fount of knowledge of life as it was. And what do we take from it and how can we make it relevant to our lives today? Because, while it is fascinating to learn about the past, it is equally important or more important to see how we can apply it in today's world.
Right. So from what, first of all, thank you, Samyak. I loved listening to you. And this is one of the reasons I wanted it was Pushpita's idea to get a young person to come and talk at this book launch. And you made it totally worth it. So the Indian government is really pushing forward the concept of Indian knowledge systems as a part of NEP, the new education policy. So I can see that, the number of meetings that are happening, and they really want to bring all this into the education policy, into the education, modern education. But the real challenge is to have all those books ready and how to weave it into every discipline, right? But I can see that we are going in that direction. So the main focus now is to know the essence of all the shastras that we have had that are already existing, that have come down to us by the oral tradition. Because unless we know what is in those shastras, we cannot get our own worldview back. that colonized view that we are having, if we want to get rid of that and get our own lenses back, we need to know what is in our Shastras. Now, maybe not all of us can learn Sanskrit and read them all, but definitely an essence of it can be brought into our education system. So if we are studying engineering, for instance, we can have a short course on the history of engineering, which ties up to the contribution of India in that. And definitely all of these sciences and engineering, various other arts subjects, if you go back to the history of it, you will find that there is a guru, or there are gurus, and there is that Indian contribution which has led to the evolution of that subject. So when we connect to that, then we are already getting empowered and confident and emboldened, right? And it helps us to now re-examine everything from our own perspective, instead of just for becoming a clone of the West, which is what our education system was designed for. When the British modified the education system and they created the education policy, they wanted to bring out clerks from the country who would serve the empire. So, and that was continuing until recently. But now I can see the churning. They're actually thinking about how do we reintroduce our own indigenous thinking into this. So that's happening, but we definitely need to try and learn our languages, Sanskrit, at least conversational Sanskrit, so that, even with a very basic minimum Sanskrit, there's a lot that you can do. I think even Curtis might vouch for that. It makes you more logical because you approach language in a scientific way. In fact, you approach everything in a scientific way the moment you start learning Sanskrit. It changes, it rewires your brain. So I think Sanskrit learning has to be a part of education. It will help even non-Indians, I'm sure. And then we should know our Shastras, at least the essence of them, written from the insider's perspective, not from the alien perspective. So we should know what's in the Yoga Vasishta, we should know what is in the Bhagavad Purana, various other texts, Artha Shastra, all those major texts that there is a whole corpus of literature, but the major ones which are connected to our subjects, we could know the basics of those. And then I think it's possible that once we get reoriented, then we get back that indigenous worldview. I don't know if I've answered your question, but in the last chapter of my book, I have briefly dwelt on this.
Yeah, and I think there's a kind of related question about how we can integrate the old with the new effectively. And I think I think there's so much happening in the world today, right? I mean, Samyak talked a lot about decolonization, but there's also so much appropriation of our knowledge that is still happening, right? So yoga is old hat by now, but if you think of Ayurveda, right, we're sort of where yoga was being appropriated about 10, 15 years ago. And so, books like yours are a fabulous base to which to start, talking about Ayurveda, nutrition, holistic living. These are all very important to today's younger generation, but all of us, but especially, we hear a lot about the Gen Zs being very motivated by these concepts. So I think it's time for us to sort of take back some of that narrative and connect it to the roots, which we can rightfully claim. Again, not denying anybody, but it's just like, honor the fount of knowledge from which a lot of Ayurvedic practitioners and people are nowadays claiming knowledge.
And there's another reason why we need to reclaim and know our Ayurvedic knowledge, because of all the patents that are being filed in the US. Yes. So if we keep delaying, if we don't know what is inside those ingredients that we have in our Ayurvedic formulation, in no time they'll all be they'll be owned, they'll be patented by Americans. So the government has to work hard in this, get all the institutions together. So we codify everything. We'll find out what is in all those formulations and ensure that India has the patents for those, because it's absolutely silly the way we have lost out. A neem got I don't know, neem, or was it haldi, which got we could not stop it. Yes, we could stop one of them, but we could not stop the other, and there are many others in the queue. So I think reclaiming our knowledge will also help us to get the ownership of that. Not that we are unwilling to share that knowledge, but we definitely shouldn't let this knowledge, which was available for everybody, we shouldn't allow that to get patented by these unscrupulous people in different parts of the world.
And I think ignorance, right? I mean, you even find yogic breathing techniques now coming back to us and becoming popular under all kinds of names.
Yeah.
Whether it's non-sleep, deep rest, or
Yes, yes.
a whole bunch of other names that come up.
Right. So that is one big reason for going back to the past and examining our knowledge before somebody else claims and patents it, right?
Right.
That's a big reason, yes.
And I think it grows to the broader discussion, something that, we at Cone are very passionate about, because there is this trend to de-Hinduize everything that the world values today. So, it is not a aberration that Ayurveda is being disconnected from Hinduism, because, people value Ayurveda, so they want to de-Hinduize it, because Hinduism is, as we all know, often reduced to, conflict, cows, caste, curry, etc. Which brings me to the question, of course, that must be asked. Any discussion about education and ancient India? There's always a lot of talk about, well, is this all Brahmanical supremacy? Is this all Brahmanical knowledge? What did the caste system have to do with this? Who was oppressed, who was not? So I'd love for you to answer that. Your book does touch on that, and at least in the context of modern history, because caste, as I always like to say, is not a term that, and I challenge anybody to find that term in any of our hundreds and hundreds of shastras. So caste is a European term, and so I would love to hear what your book shares in terms of the findings about education and in that context.
No, so what people need to understand is that only a small percentage of people were dedicated to studying the Vedas. Vedas as in intonating properly, memorizing the Vedas completely. Only a very small number of people. And these people had to lead very austere lives because they are now in the pursuit of Brahman. That's how the word Brahmana came. And so they have to follow very stringent rules of shocha, of achara, right? So that, like having bath so many times a day, and not having food before you have fed the creatures and you have fed others and then you feed yourself. There's so many codes of conduct that had to be followed in order to be purified enough to study the Vedas. So it was not as if there was a clamor for people, hundreds of people who want to go and study the Vedas and lead that austere lifestyle where they have to get up at 4 a.m., and do all these things, all these rituals. So this is a kind of misinformation that has been spread as if, there was this hegemony of Brahmanas who were preventing others. It was just that the Vedas had to be treated with respect and there was a certain code of conduct that had to be followed. And you had to have the adhikara to study it like that. And so it was not like a right that, I have the right to go and study this and so I'm going to, it was not like that. You had to have the qualification and the eligibility to do that. So we do hear of people from so-called lower varnas also getting the adhikara and going and studying the Vedas. So that needs to be clarified. But what I want to talk about is that most of the people, the majority of the population was engaged in learning skills, life skills, so that they can manufacture something and they can earn money out of it. They can sell their products. So that's why we had textiles, we had carpentry. India was producing so many goods which were exported, and many of these producers were actually not from the higher upper varnas or jatis. They could well be called the lower jatis in terms of whether how close they are to Vedic education. So the thing is that these jatis which were producing all these things, they were rich. They used to they earned a lot of money, and there was a parallel education system where all the people who wanted to learn these skills were being trained. So that was also, I have mentioned that in the book, that the skills were being taught, and a student could go as an apprentice, live with the teacher who would teach that skill. So whether it was weaving textiles or whether it was carpentry or anything, making sculptures. So you would learn by living with the teacher. And that teacher could be a guru as well. If he was going to be a life coach and guide the students in every aspect of life, that could be a guru as well. So we must know that there was just very few people who were studying the Vedas in terms of intonation, because that was very hard. You had to chant it 1,000,000 times before you get it right. And so it was not like there's a mad rush for everybody to learn to become a Brahmana. And yes, there are plenty of ceremonies where people have earned the adhikara. And there are ceremonies where they become a Brahmana. And there are ceremonies where Brahmanas have been demoted to lower levels because they are not maintaining what the decorum, or they are not maintaining the shocha or the achara for needed for studying the Vedas. And so they are getting getting demoted, to those varnas which do not have the adhikara to study. So these things was mobile. What happened under the British is that once they did the caste census and they put all the surnames in those categories of caste, then they got frozen in time. And now, this is permanently high caste and this is another one is permanently low caste. That was not the situation in India before the British came. So we do hear of Shudras who became kings. We do hear of Brahmanas who lost the Brahmana status because of something they did. They killed an animal or they did something. All those things have happened. And so education was essentially skill-based, but only a small number of people went and learned all the higher shastras, and they were highly respected by society because they have undergone all that torture of eating, insipid food. They are not supposed to eat spicy food and all that, getting up early in the morning, all those things. They were respected that they are doing all these austerities to get higher learning and to realize Brahman, to get self-awareness. And so these kind of these gurus and these students as well, wherever they went, they were treated with respect. Now, if they were so exploitative, why would they be respected? Why would doors open to them and people offer food to them? So that's something that I think I've tried to explain in my book, but needs more emphasis.
And I think that you sort of started to answer one of the questions we got from the audience, which was, how did one become a guru in ancient Bharat? What was the compensation payment method? How were they known and sought out? So I don't know if you just want to build on the thread you were in terms of how the society sort of sustained this education infrastructure ecosystem, this knowledge revolution that you talk about.
So I would request this questioner, to please read my book, because it tells you how education was funded, all the details of how the ecosystem supported the seekers of knowledge. So, everybody from the poorest person to the wealthy artisan to the very, very wealthy people, everybody was contributing to educational institutes because it was considered very meritorious to say that I donated so much money to this Pathshala or to this Vihara. I gave so much grain. I sent whatever I produced in my fields. Even farmers were donating. So that's how the education was funded, by people who donated to these institutes. And typically a guru could not charge fees. So if a guru at the end of the education period said, you have to pay me this much, then he would lose respect in society and people would not send their students to that guru who is selling his knowledge. You can't sell knowledge because there is a moral obligation for everybody, everyone who possesses knowledge, to share that knowledge. That was the culture. So to become a guru in ancient Bharat, your guru has to give the sanction that you can become a guru. So in fact, many learners were not allowed to teach until they reach that level where they don't have ego, where they don't take credit for everything and they give up ego. That's when the guru would say, yes, you are ready to teach. You can become a guru yourself. So that's the way it went. It was this kind of certification is not there in today's world. It was very high level certification. So please read my book to get a better idea.
So I think we talked a lot about colonialism and the need to decolonize. But I think we have to talk a little bit about exactly what happened during colonial rule and why it has had such a brutal impact on our education system. And I think it's something you bring out a lot. And I think as I read it, my realization was that, it is, I think, well recognized today that colonialism was a brutally extractive system with regard to, the transfer of wealth, commodities, forced labor that enriched the colonial powers. But I think reading your book made me realize that there also seems to have been maybe an equally significant but lesser known sort of transfer of knowledge. And your book sort of brings out the interconnect, what went west and now comes back east as, Western knowledge. And those of us who try to trace any historical roots are kind of laughed out of the door. And the role of Macaulay, right? So Macaulay famously wrote that a single shelf of a good European library was worth the whole native literature of India and Arabia. But in your book, you sort of assert that if a catalog of India books and manuscripts were to be translated, that India books and manuscripts that were translated into European languages were compiled in a book, it would be like a really bulky, hefty book. Again, that's a brilliant way to think of how popular narrative on knowledge interchange is actually quite inverted. But I just want to understand, like, so 75 years after the British have left, we are in the 75th year of India's independence. What is what explains this dichotomy between reality and popular belief, even among Indians, Indians living in India, Indians living abroad, educated Indians, smart Indians? Why are we struggling to comprehend this sort of brutality and this history of ours?
Well, we know how our textbooks have been manipulated, right? I mentioned that in my book. A lot of these things haven't even been written down, haven't been taught to us. So we have got totally deracinated. There is this self-loathing. So we have continued with the same education policy that the British had set up for us. So it was the same kind of learning about, things, how science has come to us from the West. So every theorem, Pythagoras theorem has come from the West. It is just so laughable that when you go back to our earlier ancient texts and you find the same theorem there, and it's there about the hypotenuse, the sides of a triangle, it's all there in Sanskrit. And then we people still don't know. And we think that it has come, we call it Pythagoras theorem. So, I mean, why is it like this? We know that this is clearly, there was a leadership that did not do its job. So we had terrible education ministers who were themselves deracinated. They didn't know what India had contributed to the world. And so they just continued with whatever literature was already going around in English. So I think that's the reason, I would say. There has not been work done by the leadership. And since we all gravitated towards a medium of instruction, which was not ours, not our language, so we were not reading what's written in our own books. So if we had read our mathematics text, if we had read Vaisheshika Sutra, then we can see already the laws of motion very beautifully expressed over there. And we would not, so if we are told that Newton brought these laws of motion, we say, what? We have already read it in that ancient text. So you see, that disconnect is the reason why we are what we are. And the extent of my ignorance is something I'm discovering every day. There was Thomas Hardy's text, which we had in school. It was a compulsory reading. The Mayor of Casterbridge, Thomas Hardy. And I just love that line where, it says, character is fate. And I said, wow, this is the most profound thing I've heard. Character is fate, because what you are is what will determine what will happen to you, right? And then I came across the Upanishad, the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, and then it comes again and again in all our ancient texts. The same thing said even more beautifully. How whatever you do, whatever you think gets hardwired into your system, and then eventually that is what will become, and then that alters your fate. So this is what has happened. This is actually, it was a well-intentioned policy when Macaulay implemented the English Education Act. It was designed for this, that we get alienated from our heroes, our authors, and we start thinking of the West as the giver of knowledge. So we will revere Shakespeare, we will revere Thomas Hardy. Of course, I have nothing against them. I love their writing. I love it. But I wish we also, it was all in context, that we know what is in our ancient Shastras, and then we read all these Shakespeare and Thomas Hardy, and we're able to compare. Why not compare them? Compare what he said with what was said in our Shastras. That did not happen. So, I mean, why it happened, we know. Now, how do we set it right? I think we need more of Samyak Pandey. Samyak Pandey is coming from the students, and then maybe things will change.
Right. I think the other fascinating part of your book was, the effort. You detail the knowledge ecosystem, and then any good ecosystem requires effort to build, sustain, but also protect it from the attacks that happen. And lots of fascinating threads in your books about how, despite centuries of attacks, so much was lost, but so much also survived. And I think your book talks about that maybe 5 to 20 million manuscripts still survive in India. That's a mind-boggling number. And I think for anybody who wants to make a difference, to echo what has been said so often, right? Go back and read some of this stuff, make an effort to translate it or make it more accessible to other folks. But could you throw color on how your book mentions that rich pockets of manuscripts were found in certain places? And I was struck by the fact that you mentioned Jaisalmer, Jodhpur, Bikaner, which I thought were like sort of, hard-fought border areas. So what sort of brought about this dichotomy that some of these ancient treasures are found in what we think of as like, hard-fought border areas in our history?
Yeah, so there's lots of things have happened. I mean, people used to flee with manuscripts. There are many touching stories of scholars who are being, attacked, invaded, and then how they are bundling up their manuscripts. And there is this, I have put this story of Vedanta Deshika, if you remember, where he acts like a corpse. He pretends to be a corpse among all the slain bodies, but he's actually holding on to the manuscripts, and then he escapes, and then he goes to another city. And then he uses that to that he publishes it there, and then he writes more books. And that's how in that city, Melkote, you will find a library where these books are available. So the same thing happened there in Rajasthan as well. So from time to time, those who fled with the manuscripts would regroup at one place. And that's why you even have underground libraries, underground places where they have stored manuscripts. You find them there. So, I mean, this is another research that is needed, that how, these manuscripts surfaced in this place. All those things have to be done. I've just given some tidbits. So there's a story of a city, a town that was being invaded, and the Brahmanas, they knew that their manuscripts are going to be defiled and desecrated by the invaders. So they started throwing them in the river. They were about to throw. But then among the invaders, there was a Rajput king also who was with them. And I think that was the one, Bikaner connection, right? And yes, and he requested them not to throw the manuscripts. He said, I'll take them to my kingdom and keep them carefully. And that's how he managed to salvage some manuscripts. And apart from that, of course, there are a lot of migratory movements that needs to be researched all over India, right from ancient times. And many of them were because they were being attacked and they were trying to save the manuscripts from the invaders. And that's how some of the manuscripts from the north have been found in the south, because somebody went, the group of scholars went there and reached there. And then Tibet, so many manuscripts were taken to Tibet by these, when these universities were being destroyed. Many of them took the manuscripts to Tibet, and that's where they survived in the most authentic form. And that's how we have probably many good condition manuscripts in Japan and China, Taiwan, all the colder countries, because they were these scholars who fled there and preserved them there.
Yeah, I think your book is also fascinating insights on how, the other thing British are supposed to be credited, given false credit for, is making us a nation. But your book outlines the so many interconnectedness of not just knowledge, but like people coming to rescue each other or help each other. So you could see that they definitely thought of themselves as a shared civilizational identity.
Absolutely.
And they came to each other's aid, and they sent murtis or treasures or manuscripts for safekeeping when their own area became unsafe for whatever reason, and then they would be returned when their area became safe again. So I think it just shows these very deep civilizational connects. So I don't know how much more time we have, but if the audience has any questions, would love to just remind them to send them in.
I saw a raised hand. I think somebody, was it Rajesh Patelji who raised a hand?
Oh, I was not looking at raised hands, but
I don't see.
Yes, thank you, Sahana ji, for all this launching book and all this knowledge. My question is that, is it possible to find an example of modern applications of Indian ancient knowledge and provide that to our schools in India?
Well, actually, I have an example in the last chapter of my book of Manjul Bhargava, who won the Fields Medal, which is the highest award given in mathematics, which is like the Nobel Prize. And I've given his story of how, when he used to go back in the summer holidays, he grew up in America. He used to go back to Jaipur in his summer holidays, and he learned Sanskrit from his grandfather. And he started looking through the manuscripts, and his father taught him the concepts of Pingala, Brahmagupta, and various other mathematicians of ancient India. And that's how he solved the Gauss's theorem. He found the solution to the Gauss's theorem in the same style as all these ancient mathematicians. And he got inspiration from them and he used some of their work to give a solution, a very elegant, very short solution to Gauss's theorem. So this is just, and he got the highest award in mathematics for that, the Fields Medal. So this is just one example, but I'm sure there are many, many things that can be done. You know, if you mine our own Shastras, we read our texts in the original, we are going to get plenty of ideas about solving today's problems, whether it is health related, all the health problems that we are having. Many of these, you know, have been experienced in the past. There's nothing new. Even during COVID, you could see that so many Ayurvedic formulations were working very well for people. I see the modern diseases being fought by ancient formulations. Then you have in agriculture, lots of things that you can take. You can take it, water management. There is so much you can learn from ancient India. So I think if we translate these manuscripts, which are still untranslated lying around, we might get some new insights which we can use for today's problems.
Great. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I think architecture, right? We're in the middle of a heat wave, and I think some of the old style of architecture, if it could be adapted for modern day and scaled for modern day living.
Absolutely. The cow dung plaster, which I just read about. So even now I hear from people that in the villages, they have, even if they have a modern house, they keep one room which is plastered with cow dung, because during the hot summers, that is the coolest room where you don't need air conditioning or anything. And members of the family go and retire to that room in the afternoon when it's hottest. And during winter, that is the warmest room as well. So just imagine cow dung, which, you know, a lot of people revile that what is this nonsense cow dung, you know, don't be archaic. But so this is where, I mean, cow dung, if you look at, that is the reason why the cow was worshipped in ancient India, because it had, all these cow products were so useful. So these are the things I think we could take from the past. Medical formulations, architecture. I'm sure there are many other disciplines waiting to be explored.
Sure. In my village, they just modernized all the houses back in Gujarat. But it used to be, the cow dung used to be the thing like 20 years ago, you know, when I used to visit India.
Right.
Yeah.
So now they can't do without air conditioning. It's so warm. And just imagine a cow dung plastered room doesn't need anything. It's just so cool.
Absolutely.
I see a question, can we not file lawsuits in the US courts to reclaim our knowledge heritage? So I think if somebody in the audience knows lawyers or is a lawyer, that would be a great thing for folks to take on. I think Sahana ji has done her bit by writing a book that gives us a lot of research to draw upon. Lawsuits are obviously very expensive.
So yeah, that needs funding, and that also needs a very coordinated effort by the Indian government. That's how they won the other lawsuit. One of the lawsuits, I think Curcumin, the Haldi, they won that lawsuit because they all got together, took out all the ancient texts to give the evidence that this was already in use. So it's not something new that you have invented, this compound. And that's how they won the case. So this kind of work has to be done for everything.
Also Basmati. And I think Basmati
right.
was interesting because it was a collaboration between the Indian and the Pakistani governments, you know, because the Basmati region is split between the two countries.
Yeah. So we need those collaborations. We need those collaborations and the funding in order to file those lawsuits maybe and get that restored back to India. India is the giver of that knowledge.
I do think that, you know, this cultural exchange and the educational exchange that you are prompting here in the US and in the UK, I think is really an important start, because it is also about getting educational departments, higher ed here, to understand this rich history. And so I think that's a wonderful place. I'm just wondering if you could speak just briefly, because I know we have to end, but as a resident here in the US, what is your experience like? And before I also want to acknowledge that that your book was originally published by Vitasta Publishers in Delhi. So I want to acknowledge that they you know, they're publishing this book in India, and also for us to be able to make this available here in the US and in the UK. But just, you know, your experience here in the US and getting universities and other educational institutions to understand this rich history.
So I think that's going to be a bit of a challenge. The academicians are actually living in their own silos, and they have this peer group, And then they, so there is a certain kind of mindset that is existing there, which is not very welcoming towards this viewpoint that ancient India did brought all this knowledge and things like that. But I'm not saying that it's impossible to engage with them. I think we need to work more on this. But definitely, I would like to see more opening of minds in the US, because there is a tendency to go with the colonized knowledge. Because they are the ones who actually wrote the papers, right? In the beginning, when all those journals started in various European languages, and a lot of this knowledge was appropriated from the colonies and just put in the form of papers. For example, I have quoted Garcia de Orta in the book, Portuguese who lived in Goa, and so he used to fall sick very often, and then whenever he was ill, he was being cured by the local the indigenous doctors. And then he learned from them what they were using in their formulations, and he wrote a paper which got published, and he didn't give any credit to these people. So that's so now that whole peer group has been formed, and to disprove all this and say that no, this knowledge has come from India, it's going to take a bit of work.
Right.
And I mean, I think some people are trying, but there has not been too much of headway. So that's work to be done.
Exactly.
Here I must make a plug for my organization, the Coalition of Hindus of North America, because we have tried to focus. Obviously, we're very new. We encourage everyone to check us out. But one of our big areas of focus is exactly that, decolonization, which is why when I was in India last year, I was like, I have to pick up Sahanaji's book. But I think we are trying very hard to push back on a very coordinated effort by academia in the West to really sort of, again, de-Hinduize a lot of this literature. And, I think I would encourage everyone to join forces with organizations like ours, because in the US context, an organizational pushback is very important. I mean, individual efforts can only go so far. So both our efforts on pushing back on Hinduphobia within the academia, within journalism, and then also trying to explain the caste nonsense that is overtaking the United States, starting with my home state of California. Those are all big battles that the community needs to educate itself. Again, I think we always ask everyone to start with education. Nobody needs to take us on our words. Just the Shastras are there. The good English translations are there. Go read them if you don't know how to read Sanskrit. And once you've read your own history, come back and help correct it for others.
Thanks. That was a great answer.
Indeed. That's certainly, I think, I'm honored to publish your book here in the US and make it available also in the UK. And, I think indeed there's a lot of work to be done. But it is through this grassroots efforts that we take this, one person at a time through our education of ourselves and through our families and through institutions that we've all participated in this country as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for a very rich discussion and reading and conversation. Thank you to everyone for your wonderful questions. We'll have just one quick moment if there's any other questions. Please, if you haven't gotten a copy of Sahana's book, please go out and find a copy, because it is so enlightening and so wonderful and educational. So thank you so much. Are there any closing comments before we end today's discussion?
You want to announce your discount? Have you mentioned it?
I did. I can repost it again because it was posted just a few moments ago, but I'll repost it.
This is for only those who are attending today, or?
No, you can please share the link, share the code with your family and friends. I'd be happy to honor that, really, because we want your book to be as widely available as possible, and it is available on Amazon and other national retailers here in the US, and it is coming soon to the UK. So I know if anyone is joining us from the UK, it is in the process of being made available there. It just takes a little bit longer in logistics to make it available, but it will soon be available there as well. And it's also in ebook as well on Kindle and Apple and Google and other ebook retailers internationally. So.
I also want to just tell everybody that, it's not just buying for ourselves. We should encourage our schools, our libraries, because they're always looking for suggestions. Sahana ji's last book is, Sakona also runs Hindu Parents Network, and her last book is something that we have referred to a number of school districts that we are working with as part of the decolonization process. So again, that is something everybody can do because everybody is connected to, a library, a school, and other people. So when you next need to give gifts, here are some great ideas instead of another, another vase of flowers or some, another cake or something like that.
That's so sweet of you, Pushpita. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for all your hard work and devotion to such an important topic. And we look forward to a long life for your work and your book, and look forward to more conversations like this. Thank you everyone for joining, and recording will be made available on YouTube, and I will circulate this recording as well so others can have it for those who weren't able to join. Thank you so much.
Namaste to everyone.
Thank you.
Namaste, everyone.
Namaste.